Welcome to Highlighted, a Life Church Midweek Podcast. Here, we're on a journey to look for ways to make our sermons more practical in our everyday lives, and we want to inspire you to live out your faith every single day, not just on Sundays. In each episode, we break down our messages and highlight our ministries to see how God is working in our church and through our community. And normally, I'm sitting here with Pastor Joshua, and as you look, Pastor Joshua has gotten a lot more beautiful because it's actually my favorite guest to have on the Highlighted podcast. My beautiful wife. She even makes me stumble over my words.
Mm-hmm.
And Marissa, I love having you here. So thank you for being on Highlighted. And it's also your first time for them to see you on Highlighted. So this is week 3 of being on YouTube. So if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Amazon Prime and you're thinking to myself, man, I wonder what they look like. Yeah. Well, you can go to Life Church Roanoke on YouTube and you can watch these episodes if you would like, or you can continue to listen to them if you would like. That's my preferred way, is I like listening to them. Yeah. But if you want to watch, or if you can only access on YouTube, then we love having you here. But let's jump into this week's episode. We just jumped into our brand new series. We talked about it last week, and some of you might not know this, but Marissa, you are a listener of the Highlighted podcast because you're not here in the room with us while we record these. And I always come home and I tell you about these conversations I had with Pastor Joshua, and I'm like, man, like that was such a good one. And you're like, what did you talk about? And I'm all, what do I say?
What
do I say when you ask, what did you guys talk about?
You say, you'll have to listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
Which I always do, but I get a little bit of the inside scoop sometimes.
Yeah. So it's been a fun past couple, I think it's been 18 weeks.
That's crazy.
Of Highlighted since we started. And here we are on video format, and we just jumped into a brand new series. We teased it last week in the podcast, but you already knew what it was because I was showing you some stuff. And I remember last week, before we break down, I just want to share with you guys. We were sitting, I don't even remember where we were sitting, and I showed Marissa the bumper video for the sermon series. And she's like, oh, yes, I need to know what it's called because you guys didn't say on Highlighted. So last week, if you listened to last week's episode and we got to the end and we're talking about this brand new sermon series and you're like, oh, what is it called? And then just for us to say, come find out on Sunday. What a disappointment. But this Sunday was not a disappointment at all. And it's called Margins of Faith. If you missed it, pause this video, pause this episode right now and go back and listen to Sunday's sermon because it was just a great way to get started in this brand new series. And I'm super excited to be here for the next 3 weeks to come. So it's going to be all of August. We're going to be in this series. And it's this idea that focuses on making room for God in our lives. But not just making room, but creating a space for God and for others to move and to speak into our lives because we live busy lives. And, today is a prime example of that for us. And, many of you know my dad's been in and out of hospital and we've been praying for him. You guys have been praying for him and we're so grateful for that. But today has been one of those days where it feels like we're running back and forth. I was here at church. I was at the Krause's house this week taking care of their dogs because, as you know, they're out of town with our students in Columbus, Ohio this week. And I was all over the place. Yeah. And, we finally got here. We finally got set up to record. And, in the midst of all the busyness, we need to have time to just kind of pause and take a moment. And that's what I love about this series is really about pausing and taking a moment. So this week's sermon was about the rich young ruler. And man, what a way to kick off the series, right? Yeah,
it was. It was super practical. And I think that's what this whole series is going to be about. And everyone's busy. Everyone's going through their day and thinking, they're busier than others. And this is just a great way to really apply it to your week, to your day. And I'm excited to see what else Pastor Joshua has in store.
Yeah, and something special from this past Sunday. Again, if you missed it, I don't know what you're still doing here. Pause the video and go watch Sunday's sermon. But you got to close at the end of service. And something that we do, if you come to Life Church, if you've been to any of our services, usually for, I think, 99% of the time, we'll have someone open up our service and open in prayer and kind of get us started in the right way. And then we'll have someone close our service, kind of recap what the day was like, recap what we talked about. and kind of apply it to our lives. And it's like a mini highlighted almost.
Yeah.
And you were closing on Sunday, and you shared a little bit about a song. And I don't want to take too much away. So you want to expound on that a little bit and talk a little more about that, because man, that was incredible.
Yeah, I was just talking about, there's a song called Monday Morning Faith, and you can go back and listen to it, or you can just listen to this right here. But the lyrics say, what is it? Like, hell's not scared of a Sunday morning faith unless it leads, or no, hell's not scared of Sunday morning faith if it leads to empty praises. But what really makes darkness fall is when the saints arise and praise in quiet. And what that's saying is, what really makes darkness flee, what really makes the Satan run, is when we seek God every day through our life, through our week, not just on Sundays. Sunday's a great way to listen to Pastor Joshua and take in as much as you can from him. But what really makes a difference is if we actually apply it every single day after that Sunday. So.
Yeah. And that was, I was up there, and that was, it's always special for me when we're on the stage together, but that was really special just because it felt so practical. And that's one of the ways that I really like to connect with sermons is through songs and through music, because that's what I do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to dig in too much into that, because I want to bring that up later as we break down the sermon a little bit. But man, what an awesome way to apply it, that, we can't just live our lives on Sundays. And it just feels like what me and Pastor Josh have been talking about time and time again, not just on this podcast, not just on Sunday mornings. It's just how our past series and our upcoming series and this series are all kind of interconnected with each other. And I just think it's so cool that we just got off of a 15-week long journey. It was 12 sermons through all of the minor prophets. And it was about making room for God in our lives. And then we hear from the book of Jude and how we're supposed to remain in him and how he strengthens us. And now we're here in our brand new series called Margins of Faith, back in the margins, digging around, but it's kind of the reverse. And we're looking for ways we can make our lives less busy and really put time focusing on God and putting him back in the center. So it just feels like this theme that we're going over and over again. But speaking of themes, speaking of stories and what we're talking about, this past Sunday, we talked about the rich young ruler and that story found in Scripture, and something incredible that Pastor Joshua just shared, and it just, he kind of, I don't know, it felt like he kind of brushed over it, but it really impacted me. Was he said, we know him as the rich young ruler because that's the context in the story that we're reading. That's his context. We don't know his name, we don't know what he was a ruler of, we don't know where he was from. Like, we kind of know where he's from, but not like his home address or anything. We don't know anything about this guy. But we know that he went up to Jesus and he said, what must I do to be saved? And, Jesus gives him an answer, and he says, I've done all that. And Jesus says, well, then do this. And he says, sell all your possessions and come and follow me. And he couldn't do it. And because he didn't do it, we might have known his name if he sold all his possessions and started to follow Jesus. Maybe we wouldn't, but we also would have known him as the guy who sold everything and dropped his whole life to follow Jesus, not the rich young ruler. And Pastor Joshua said, the context that we know him is as the rich young ruler. And I'm going to pull out my notes. And if you're not taking notes on Sunday, take notes. But in Pastor's points, he said, margin is not about making time for opportunities, but about having time, right? And this rich young ruler, right, felt like he had the world, right? He could have had anything, right? Palace. He could have had anything, any crop, I'm trying to think of like the latest sandal that would be available at that time. But he could have had anything. And, it wasn't about having stuff for him. It wasn't about, not having the money to go and donate all his stuff to the poor, because he could have, right? He was rich and he was young. He had his whole life ahead of him. So I'm sure if he wanted to, he could have donated all his stuff to the poor. And then bought a bunch of new stuff to replace it with and totally been fine. He wouldn't have had to take out a second mortgage on his palace or anything. But, right, so it wasn't about making time. It wasn't about making room, but it's about having time and having room for God. That's so good. What is some ways that we can make sure we're intentional about having time for God and for others? Yeah.
I mean, I think, to answer that, I think you need to look at the backbone of what Pastor Joshua said this series was about, which is Romans 12, 1 through 2. And I'm not going to quote the whole thing because I haven't memorized it yet. But, part of it is do not conform to the patterns of this world. And it's, this rich king ruler was conformed to all his possessions and he couldn't give that up. And, to apply it to our life now, we're conformed to fashion. We could be conformed to, having a social media that we want to stay up to date on. And, we need to examine in our life what are things that really distract us from God? What are things that keep us away from Him that, inhibit our connection with Him? And, that's when we need to examine ourselves and say, hey, can I eliminate these so that I can make space? Not everything's bad, but if it keeps us from having that margin in our lives with God, we might need to reconsider that and say, hey, maybe I don't need as much time on social media or anything.
Yeah,
like that.
And that is something that you just did. Actually, and not to brag on you or anything, but you just deleted Instagram, and not like delete, you still have your account, but you deleted the app off your phone and you haven't been on it. And honestly, it has affected me more than you because I like to send you stuff. And I was talking to her yesterday about some stuff that I sent her, and she's like, "Oh, I deleted Instagram. Like, I don't know what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Dang it, I have to pull it up and show you. You need to see it." But even as something as simple as that, and something that I do that's similar. So I'm posting stuff on socials all the time for church. So deleting Instagram isn't something that I can always do. It's something that I have a lot of screen time, and I'm not bragging about it. But I spend too much time on my phone, and even good time, is bad time. Just because it distracts you and it takes you out of the moment and out of the kind of the busyness of life, which is a good thing, like even though life gets busy, it's good to feel human. It's good to feel involved. It's good to be present. And, but something that I do that I like to do is I have on every single social media app, I don't have notifications on at all. And so if I post something, which I don't post a whole lot, but when I do, I feel like I used to get into this thing like, oh, I got a notification. Someone liked this. Someone commented this. Someone shared this, whatever. And it would just distract me. And one of the biggest annoyances too with those notifications, especially on Instagram, I remember when they launched their stories and you could post stories on Instagram, it would always send you a notification when someone else uploaded their first story. Not all of their stories, but I remember because I was thinking in my head, and I was maybe like 16 or 17 when this feature came out, and I was thinking, man, what's my first story gonna be like? It's gonna notify everyone that Paul just posted his first story, so I kind of have to be careful. I can't just post anything as my first story. And my first story was Thanksgiving dinner. Of whatever year that was with my family, and it was just a picture of the food at the table. But even stuff like that was like, oh, someone just did this, and I'm going to click on it and see what they did. So, even if you can't delete social media because it's a connection point, or you use Messenger to communicate with your family or whatever it might be, you can still turn off not all your notifications, but you can customize it, and you can say, well, I don't want to get likes or comments, but I'll get messages. Right. Or I don't want to get this and that, but I'll get this. Yeah. So even something as simple as doing that can just free up your mind from being distracted. And even though you still have it in your hand, you can be less distracted doing it. And the next point that brings, I don't want to take too much away from our context, right? Of the rich young ruler, but he was known as the rich young ruler. And margin to connect with Jesus and each other brings context into our lives, because we talked about this. What if he did drop everything? What if he did follow Jesus? How would we know him? Right. And I think of my life, and, many of you might see me, but you might not know me, right? You might not know the things I'm passionate about, the things I care about, but But you might see me up on stage singing a song and say, well, he likes music and he's passionate about music, which is true. I love music and I'm passionate about music, but that's not all that I want to be known for. And I was talking to you a little bit about this. I think earlier today was in the realm of this context, and it brings us to our next question. But it's, how do you want to be known, right? How do you? What's your context? And for me, especially here, especially on that platform, especially on a Sunday morning or on a house of prayer Wednesday night when I'm singing, like I don't want to be known as this great musician, this great singer, this guy that loves music, right? Those are all great things and none of them are bad. But I want to be known as a worshiper first and foremost. I want to be known for the way that I worship my God, not by the songs that I sing, not by the songs that I write, not by anything else, because I feel like it's too easy to build ourselves an altar and to put ourselves on this high place when we make our focus ourselves. Yeah. And even though those can be good things, right? They can be dangerous. So what context do you want to be known by? And like, obviously we want to be known as a follower of Jesus, not as rich young rulers or fill in the blank. But how do you want to be known?
It's a good question. That's hard. I don't know. I mean, like the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh, Marissa's a doer. Like, when she hears something, she's ready to like jump into action, and just someone who has confidence in what the Lord is calling, her to do. And I don't know how to expand more on that, but that's just the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of that.
Yeah, and on Sunday, Pastor Josh kind of flew through his point. So I'm already down to the third and the last point. But we spent a lot of time in Scripture and digging through it. And again, for the last time, I'm going to say it. If you haven't already, go back and listen to it now. It was a great sermon and a lot of practical application. But his last point on Sunday was margin requires us to prioritize the truly important. And the question I have that I wrote out was, how can we make sure that we prioritize God and not the other things in life that distract us, which, feels like another similar thing where we're battling our time. Time and time again, we're battling it over and over again because time is one of those things that we're going to run out of, right? And like, if I struck oil tomorrow, unlimited money, right? And money's not a factor, right? Or if I want more friends, I can go make more friends, right? I'm sociable. I'm likable, I hope, I think. and I can go get more friends and this and that. And I feel like there's so many things that, especially in our country that we live in and in the way we live our lives that are just so accessible to us, except for time. And I feel like we've been bouncing back and forth with this kind of balance of how do we manage our lives and manage God. Right. But if we make God the priority of our life, we're kind of just juggling one basket that has everything in it. Yeah. And let me go back to this question because I already forgot what I asked. But I said that how can we make sure that we prioritize God and not the things in life that distract us? And I think it's just that if we make God a part of our life and not a thing in our life, then he automatically becomes the priority. And I feel like this is something we talked about in one of our sermon series that we broke down a while ago before our minor prophets, before highlighted. But that was one of those things that, Jesus is the priority, right? And that's one of our core values here is that Jesus would be our priority, right? Yeah. And I feel like when Jesus becomes the thing, right? And not the thing that we're trying to include, but he becomes the main thing and the main focus in our life. It's so much easier. It's so much less of a burden on us to feel like we have to juggle time or we have to juggle him into our lives. Like, for example, you love playing tennis. I don't because you always beat me. But, if you wanted to be an Olympic athlete and compete on the tennis court, right? Yeah. And you felt like, I have to balance tennis and my life, right? But those people in the Olympics aren't balancing their sport and their life. Their sport is their life, right? They wake up, and it's their job. They wake up every single day, and that's their one thing. It's like, hey, I'm going to train, I'm going to practice, I'm going to get better because this is my craft. This is what I'm about. This is what I'm doing, right? And they get better. They're the top tier athletes in the world, right? and they're on this big stage competing in front of all of the world to see, right? And it's easy for them to do it because it's what they do, right? It's not a thing that they do. It's not a hobby, right? For us, we go and play tennis when we have time because we're not Olympic tennis players, right? And I'm definitely not one. You might be a lot closer to one than I am. But tennis for us is a lot different than tennis for an Olympic athlete.
True. Yeah.
Because tennis is their life, right? And when we do that with God, right? When God becomes one of those things that, we include God in our life. We pray at dinner. We go to church. We do all the right things, but God is not our life, right? Our outlook becomes completely different. Our context comes completely different. So I just want to rephrase that to you and ask you, like, how do we make God our life?
Yeah.
Not just something we talk about, not something that we share in common with the people we go to church with, not just something we go to church for, right? But how do we make him our priority?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the things we talk about, I think we really need to apply the things we talk about, like how we say, God goes before us and he walks with us through the busyness of our lives. So when we actually go through those busy days, it's important to realize that God is walking with you through every single moment of those busy days. So, if you're overwhelmed and you're thinking, I can't do this, I need a break, take some time, take a moment and invite him in and realize, he's right there next to you, and allow him space, even in the busyness of your life. And then I'm trying to think of other practical ways, we're encouraged to have Sabbath, but we could also be encouraged to have something called a daily Sabbath. I forget which book I read, but, they mentioned a daily Sabbath, and it's, either the start of your morning or the end of your day, whether you're a morning bird or a night owl, starting off with maybe 5 minutes of that morning or 10 minutes or building it, and prioritizing and saying, for me, it's easier because I like waking up in the morning and I just feel like, if I start off on a good note, start off prioritizing God, it's going to follow throughout my day. And I think that really does make a difference if you seek that time. And it might be hard at first. You might feel like you don't have time, but then you just get lost in that time. So I really think prioritizing your time and giving God even just a little bit at the beginning makes a huge impact.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a few weeks ago when Pastor Baba was preaching, and he was talking about he liked to challenge his students with 5 and 5.
Yeah.
And once they've kind of conquered that mountain, they do 10 and 10. And then from there, they go to 15 and 15, 20 and 20, 30 and 30, whatever it might be. And basically, it's 5 minutes in the Word and 5 minutes in prayer, right? It's just 10 minutes of your day.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a lot, right? We've spent longer watching this YouTube video or listening to this podcast than that, right? 10 minutes or even 5 and 5, right? And like, if you can just make 5 minutes of space for God to move, imagine what he's going to do with those 5 minutes, right? Because it's not you spending those 5 minutes.
Right.
It's not you taking your 5 minutes to your bank of time and transactioning it, but it's God, right? And it's his timing and it's his plan and it's his will, it's his knowledge, right? And his perfection that we can't have, and he can do so much more in 5 minutes than I can do in 50 minutes on my own. Yeah. Right. That's true. But those, like you said, you kind of get lost in the time. You get lost in the sauce is something that was cheesy, but it's just one of those things that if you could just spend a little bit of time just to get started, spend 3 minutes in the morning, just praying, God, help my day today. Help me do what you want me to do. Help me see what you want me to see. Help me hear what you want me to hear. And more importantly, God, let me listen to your voice today. Let me hear it today. If you took 10 seconds just to pray that's so much better than not taking anything at all. Right? So, as much as we want to hoard our time, as much as we're bogged down by time, as much as we're busy with time is one of those things that, if we can give God just a little bit, he can do a lot more than we could ever do in 5 minutes and 10 minutes on our own. So I just want to challenge you with that as we kind of wrap up things on this podcast, is make some time for God this week, right? I don't know what it looks like for you. It might look different for you than it looks for me, but I just want to challenge you, whether that's spending more time listening to worship music this week and spending time just worshiping God, right? Even if you're at work or in your car or dropping your kids off at school, or not yet. I guess it's still the summer, but almost dropping your kids off at school.
Yeah.
But whatever it looks like, let's make room, let's make time, and let's have the ability to just hear from God this week. And I just want to leave you with that. I want to challenge you with that. Give him 5 minutes and watch what he'll do with it, right? It doesn't have to be an hour. It doesn't have to be 10 hours, right? And it could be just every day, 5 minutes, and just making that a consistent part of your life.
Yeah.
And watch how your life changes. Watch how your outlook changes. Watch how things start to seem like they get better, even if your world's crumbling apart, right? You'll start to see the good in things. You'll start to see how God is moving and working in your life. And that has always been the goal of Highlight It, is that we want to encourage you to live out your faith every single day. And that's all that we have for you. We're so excited to jump into week 2 of our series, Margins of Faith. It's going to be a great time. So plan on coming out this Sunday as we continue our series. And also we are wrapping up with House of Prayer for the summer, which is crazy. It's August. I feel like we're almost at the halfway point of August already, which is crazy, but we're only a few days in, and it just feels like it's flying by. So we have 2 more House of Prayers tonight. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this when this comes out, there's House of Prayer tonight, and then there's House of Prayer next week. It's going to be a generational night of prayer and worship. It's going to be an awesome night. You don't want to miss it. And as always, we love you, and we can't wait to see you again soon.